Ma'am, the President of the United States would like to personally meet you. Those 12 words froze the entire ballroom. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to painted lips. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Because the Secret Service agent wasn't talking to my adoptive father, the host of the Harrington Family Foundation's annual charity gala. He wasn't talking to my adoptive sisters, who had spent the last hour giving interviews about their family's legacy of generosity. He was talking to me, the black girl in the server's uniform, standing in the shadow of a marble column, balancing a tray of crystal flutes, and trying to look as small and invisible as possible in the very house that used to be my home. You know what people say about karma? Sometimes it doesn't just knock on your front door. Sometimes it lands on your private airstrip in a jet with the president as a passenger and your billionaire ex-boyfriend walking down the stairs beside him, straight toward the family that threw you out with a cardboard box and a week's notice. My name is Amara, and this is the story of how I went from being the unwanted adopted daughter kicked out of the Harrington mansion with nothing but a box of letters, to standing under the glare of television cameras while my boyfriend, now one of the youngest tech billionaires in America, introduced me as his future wife, with the President of the United States shaking my hand on live TV. But before I tell you how I ended up there, let me ask you something. How are you doing today? Where are you watching this from? Your bedroom, a bus, your lunch break, maybe a tiny apartment that doesn't feel like it belongs to you yet. Wherever you are, I hope you're somewhere that feels safe. Because home is something I spent most of my life trying to earn. Like it was a prize only given to people good enough to deserve it. If you've ever felt like you were the extra one in the photo, like you were always trying to prove your worth to people who decided a long time ago that you weren't enough, then this story is for you. And before we go back to the beginning, do me a favor. Tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Not for me, but for you. Because the way this story twists, turns, crashes, and then rises again will make you rethink what family and justice really mean. All right, let's go back. Back to when I still believed I could earn my place in the Harrington family if I just tried hard enough. I was 7 years old when Elaine and Charles Harrington adopted me out of foster care. Elaine told me later that she fell in love with my eyes first. Big, curious, always scanning the room like I was trying to memorize the world before it could change again. The social worker told her I could already read chapter books while other kids my age were still working on the alphabet. At 7, I thought I'd won the lottery. The Harrington estate sat on a hill overlooking the city, all white stone and glass and perfectly manicured hedges. It looked like the kind of house that only existed in movies. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, the good kind, like library books and leather-bound first editions. There was a real bedroom waiting for me, not a spare mattress in someone's overcrowded living room. My room had built-in bookshelves, a window seat, a soft duvet in shades of teal and cream, and a little brass lamp on a nightstand where someone had already stacked 3 books with my name written on sticky notes inside. Welcome home, Amara. There was a backyard with a swing set and a creaky wooden tree house at the far end of the lawn. And there were 2 older daughters, Olivia and Madeline Harrington, blonde, glossy, and perfectly at ease in the world in a way I had never been. I imagined they'd teach me everything: how to braid my hair, how to paint my nails without smudging them, how to tell jokes that made people laugh with me instead of at me. Elaine was everything I had dreamed a mother might be. She read to me every night, even though I could already read by myself. She helped me with homework, sat in the front row at school plays, and bragged to her friends about my report cards like they were her own trophies. "You have a mind like a laser," she'd tell me, brushing my curls back from my forehead. "Don't ever shrink yourself to make other people comfortable." When I won the science fair in 3rd grade, she framed the photo and hung it right beside Olivia's soccer trophy and Madeline's art award on the family wall. "You're just as bright as your sisters," she whispered to me once after a dinner party where no one had bothered to ask me a single question. "Don't you dare let anyone tell you otherwise." But even at 7, I wasn't blind. I saw the way Charles's jaw tightened whenever Elaine praised me in front of other people. I heard Olivia and Madeline whisper in the hallway about how I didn't exactly match the family's Christmas photos. I felt the way strangers looked at us in restaurants. Him, pale and silver-haired in a tailored suit, his elegant blonde wife, two porcelain daughters, and me, brown-skinned, curly-haired, the obvious exception in the picture. Still, I believed love could fix anything. Elaine loved me. That was my anchor. I poured myself into being the perfect daughter. Straight A's, no attitude, gratitude for everything from the new backpack to the used bicycle Charles didn't really think she needed, but Elaine insisted. By high school, I was valedictorian, captain of the debate team, and already holding early admission letters from 3 Ivy League schools. I thought, surely now I had earned my last name. Surely now the Harringtons would truly see me as one of them. I was wrong. The cracks had always been there. Hairline fractures running through the facade of our modern, inclusive family. But senior year made them impossible to ignore. Charles never came to my debate tournaments. Even when I brought home state championships, he had board calls and important client dinners. Olivia and Madeline stopped pretending to be impressed. When Elaine boasted about my achievements, they rolled their eyes or changed the subject. One night, passing by Madeline's room, I heard her on the phone. She tries so hard, it's honestly pathetic. Like, we get it, you're grateful. But she acts like every achievement is some audition for real daughter status. The word pathetic stung more than I wanted to admit. Was that what I was? Pathetic. Desperate. The foster kid who didn't understand when the audition was over. It didn't matter. I still had Elaine. As long as Elaine Harrington was alive, I believed I had a place in that house. As long as she loved me, I belonged somewhere. I clung to that belief through college. Even when the rest of the family made it clear I was only welcome for holidays if Elaine specifically asked for me. Even when Charles introduced me at functions as Elaine's passion project instead of our daughter. Even when Olivia got engaged and never once mentioned the word bridesmaid in my direction. Elaine was my North Star. During my junior year of college, she got sick. At first it was just fatigue, then a minor cardiac issue. Then suddenly it was a massive heart attack in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon that no one saw coming. By the time I reached the hospital, she was gone. I thought losing Elaine would break me. I didn't realize that losing her meant losing everything else too. The reading of the will took place 3 days after the funeral in a wood-paneled conference room that smelled like old money and polished grief. I sat between Olivia and Madeline in the same black dress I'd worn at the funeral. The dress Elaine helped me choose months earlier for job interviews we'd both assumed I'd have after graduation. The attorney adjusted his glasses and started reading. The house went to Charles. The investment portfolio and savings accounts were split between Olivia and Madeline. Elaine's jewelry collection, pieces I'd watched her polish while she told me stories, went to be divided according to family tradition between my biological daughters. Her art, her antiques, even her first edition books were itemized and allocated. And to Amara Harrington, the lawyer said finally, and my heart lifted just a little. Elaine leaves her personal correspondence collection, contained in one wooden box currently stored in the attic. There was a pause, paper rustled. That's it? Olivia laughed under her breath. She gets old mail? Heat flooded my cheeks. I kept my eyes glued to my hands, clenched together in my lap. A box of letters. I told myself maybe there was something important inside. Maybe Elaine had left me words that money couldn't buy. Maybe she'd written down truths she'd never been able to say out loud. Maybe somewhere in that box was a reason why she had loved me when no one else seemed to. I was still clinging to that hope 3 nights later when Charles knocked on my bedroom door. He didn't step inside. He just leaned on the frame, hands in the pockets of his gray slacks. "You've got a week, Amara," he said, eyes sliding past me to the half-packed suitcase on the bed. "To find somewhere else to stay." I thought I'd misheard. I'm sorry? "This house belongs to the family now," he said, as if explaining a budget report. "Elaine is gone. It's time you start your own life." "But, I am family," I whispered, my voice sounding tiny even to me. His expression didn't change. "You were Elaine's cause," he said calmly. "Her mission. We supported it while she was here. She's not here anymore." He shrugged like we were discussing a discontinued charity project instead of my entire life. "It's time to stop pretending, Amara. You don't belong here. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I could move. A week. 15 years reduced to 7 days and 3 suitcases. That night, I climbed up to the attic. The Harrington attic was organized like an archive. Carefully labeled boxes, garment bags, sealed trunks. Tucked behind a stack of holiday decorations and an old crib, I found it. A plain wooden box about the size of a carry-on. My name was written on the lid in Elaine's looping handwriting. I carried it down to my room like it was made of glass. Inside, there were dozens of envelopes, some still sealed, some already open, some just folded sheets of paper smoothed and refolded so many times they felt thin as tissue. The first letter I picked up wasn't from Elaine to me. It was from me to her. I recognized the crooked handwriting and uneven lines immediately. 8-year-old Amara, carefully sounding out words. Ink smeared where my hand had rested on the page. Dear Mom, thank you for picking me. I promise I will be the best daughter and get good grades and never cause trouble, and I will make you proud every day. Please don't ever change your mind. There beneath my childish scrawl was a note in Elaine's handwriting. You already make me proud every single day. That will never change. Love, Mom. I swallowed hard. Every letter in that box was something I had written. Mother's Day cards, notes I'd left on her nightstand before school trips, long, rambling letters from college talking about professors, cases I was reading in constitutional law, the fear and excitement of imagining law school. She hadn't thrown away a single one. She had saved my voice, my gratitude, my fear, my hope. At the very bottom of the box, under a stack of crumpled envelopes, I found a sealed letter with my name on it. The date on the top corner was 2 weeks before her heart attack. My hands shook as I slid my thumb under the seal. My dearest Amara, it began. If you are reading this, it means my heart has failed me in more ways than one. I have never been brave when it comes to difficult conversations, especially where you are concerned. There are things I should have told you years ago. I am so sorry I waited this long. I blinked back tears, forcing myself to keep reading. You were never a charity case, sweetheart. Your birth mother, Layla, was my closest friend in college. When she became pregnant at 19 and realized she couldn't raise you, she asked me for the only thing she ever truly asked of me. Promise me she'll be loved as if she were yours. I did not adopt you out of pity, Amara. I adopted you because I loved you, because you were a promise between me and the woman I loved like a sister. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I kept going. Layla died in a car accident when you were 3, just before the adoption was finalized. She never saw the way you crinkle your nose when you're thinking hard or how you laugh with your whole body when something genuinely surprises you. But she left you something Charles does not know exists, and I need you to find it before he does. In my safety deposit box at Lakeside Bank, there is an envelope with your name on it. Inside is money Layla put aside for you, more than enough to make sure you would never be at the mercy of anyone else's kindness. She wanted your future to be yours, not dependent on whether someone decided you were worth keeping. Below that, there were account numbers, a tiny sketched map of where she'd hidden the key inside her jewelry box, and a final paragraph that broke me open. I have failed you in some ways, my darling girl. I allowed Charles's discomfort and the girl's jealousy to go unchallenged when I should have fought harder for you. I told myself that love in private was enough. It wasn't. You deserve to be claimed publicly as mine, as ours. If you feel angry at me when you read this, know that you are justified, but also know this. You were never the outsider in my heart. You were always my daughter. Love, always, Mom. I sat on the floor with that letter pressed to my chest until the sun started to lighten the edge of the curtains. Everything I had believed about myself shifted, just a little. I was not the foster kid Elaine had rescued out of pity. I was not the charity project Charles tolerated to protect his image. I was the daughter of Elaine's best friend, a promise kept between 2 women who loved me before I even knew what love meant. My birth mother had left me an inheritance. Elaine had hidden it to protect me, and the rest of the family had built an entire narrative around me being lucky to be there, while secretly keeping a door open to push me back out. The next morning, I took the bus to Lakeside Bank. The safety deposit box was heavier than it looked. Inside, there was an envelope with my name on it, just like Elaine had said. There was also a stack of photographs and a few letters written in looping, careful handwriting that looked eerily like my own. The amount of money in that envelope made my head spin. It wasn't buy a jet money, but it was finish law school without debt, rent an apartment without panic, never beg the Harringtons for help again. Money. Enough to choose my own path. Enough to walk out of that house with my head up. Enough that, for the first time in my life, my survival wasn't tied to whether someone else decided to keep me. On the bus ride home, clutching the folder to my chest, I stared out the window at a city that suddenly looked different. Not kinder, not softer, but full of doors I might actually be able to open. And yet, beneath the relief, another feeling simmered. Betrayal. Elaine had loved me. That was real. But she had also kept this truth from me for nearly 20 years. She had watched me twist myself into knots to earn a place in a family that had never truly committed to me, even in court paperwork. She had let me believe I was lucky to be included in Christmas photos, when legally they'd kept me at arm's length on purpose. She had hidden my birth mother's last gift until it was almost too late to change anything. I didn't know how to hold both truths at once, gratitude and anger, love and disappointment, survival and abandonment. I only knew one thing. I wasn't going to grovel for a place in the Harrington house anymore. I still had 4 days before Charles's deadline. 4 days to pack up the life I'd spent 15 years building. 4 days to decide whether I'd walk out quietly or walk out knowing that this letter was the first domino in a chain I couldn't even see yet. What I didn't know, standing there with that envelope in my hands, was that a different chain of events had already started, far away from the Harrington estate. In another city, in a boardroom lined with glass and screens full of numbers, a quiet, focused young CEO named Ethan Park was preparing to inherit his father's tech empire. He was also in between meetings and mergers and federal briefings, still asking the same question he'd been asking for 3 years. What happened to Amara? I had no idea that the letter in my hands, the inheritance I'd just discovered, and the decision I was about to make would eventually bring a private jet, the President of the United States, and Ethan Park himself back to the front lawn of the house that had just thrown me out. Back then, all I knew was this. I had 4 days to pack, and rock bottom was coming faster than I could imagine. 3 days after I found Elaine's letter and my birth mother's inheritance, the knock came at 7 a.m. It wasn't a gentle, "Are you awake, sweetheart" kind of knock. It was the clipped, business-like tap I'd heard 1,000 times before on the other side of Charles Harrington's office door. I opened it to find Olivia standing there in silk pajamas and a perfect messy bun that had definitely been crafted by someone who'd never actually been messy a day in her life. "Dad wants to see you in his study," she said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. "Bring your things?" Her gaze flicked to the half-packed suitcase on my bed and lingered there just long enough to make her point. She didn't wait for my answer. The walk down the corridor felt longer than it had my first night in this house. Back then, I'd trailed behind Elaine, dazzled by the chandeliers and the polished banister, clutching a stuffed bear the social worker had given me. Now I walked alone, fingers still stained with the ink of Elaine's last letter. Charles was already seated behind his desk when I entered his study, a thick folder open in front of him. Madeline perched in one of the leather chairs across from him, legs crossed, phone in hand, pretending not to be invested in whatever was about to happen. "Sit," Charles said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I stayed standing. "I'll be out by the end of the week," I said. "You don't have to make this formal." "Actually," he replied, smoothing a page in the folder, "we do." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What is that?" "Legal clarification," he said. "Elaine's death has forced us to review some oversights regarding your status in this family." "Oversights," I repeated. Madeline leaned forward, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "The thing is, Amara, when our parents took you in, they were very young and idealistic about adoption. They didn't fully understand the legal complexities. The laws were different then." I stared at them both. "What are you saying?" Charles slid a document across the desk. The legalese swam in front of my eyes, but certain phrases jumped out. "Placement with intent to adopt, temporary guardianship, incomplete decree." Your adoption, he said, was never fully finalized. Elaine rushed the process. There were documents that were never properly filed. That's not possible, I said, even as Elaine's letter flashed through my mind. I allowed Charles's discomfort to go unchallenged. I told myself love in private was enough. I've had this last name for 15 years. You've used our last name, Madeline corrected, but legally, you were a foster placement in our care. Once you turned 18, the obligation was flexible. My legs gave out and I dropped into the chair. Elaine would have told me, I whispered. Elaine wanted to protect you from unnecessary stress, Charles replied smoothly. She thought there would be time to sort it out. Unfortunately, time ran out. What does this mean, I asked, though I already knew. It means, he said, closing the folder, that you are no longer our responsibility. Legally, we have fulfilled every obligation we had toward you. It's time you move on. Move on, I repeated, from the only home I've ever had. This house, Charles said, gesturing vaguely around us, belongs to the family. We have reputations, obligations. We can't indefinitely carry the burden of someone we're not legally tied to. There it was. Burden. After 15 years of straight A's and gratitude and never asking for more than the bare minimum of love, I was still a line item on a spreadsheet, an expense they were tired of justifying. I understand, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Madeline exhaled in visible relief. Good. The moving company will be here at 6. Dad's given you until tonight. That's generous, you know. I stood. You're right, I said. It is generous. I walked out of that study for the last time without looking back. The next 10 hours felt like dismantling a museum exhibit of a life that had never fully belonged to me. I packed my clothes into 2 suitcases. My books, the ones Elaine had given me, went into 1 box. Personal documents, photos, and Elaine's letters went into another. I left the framed family photos on the wall. I left the designer dresses Olivia had outgrown and donated to my closet like charity. I left the throw pillows and fairy lights and trinkets that had made this space look like mine, knowing now they'd only ever been set dressing. In the hallway, I could hear Olivia and Madeline talking excitedly about what they'd do with the extra room. Home office, Olivia said. I could put the ring light by the window for Foundation live streams. I want it as a guest room, Madeline replied. Somewhere to host actual family, or, I don't know, press. Neither of them knocked on my door. At 6 sharp, the movers arrived. They loaded my boxes with professional indifference. By 7, the room was almost empty. I was hauling the last box down the front steps when a familiar car turned into the driveway. Elaine's silver sedan. She left it to me in the will. 1 line buried under trust funds and property allocations. To Amara, I leave my car. May it carry her toward a life that belongs entirely to her. I had almost forgotten. Charles stood in the doorway, watching as I loaded the final box into the trunk. This isn't personal, he said. I looked up at him. Everything about this is personal, I replied. You just don't feel it. For a second, something, guilt, discomfort, flickered across his face. Then the mask slid back into place. Goodbye, Amara. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You're resourceful. Goodbye, Arm, I said. I got in the car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, the Harrington estate looked smaller than it ever had. The windows glowed with the warm light of a house full of people who would sit down to dinner and talk about challenging decisions, and what Elaine would have wanted while their adopted daughter navigated rush-hour traffic toward a 1-bedroom apartment. But as the gate swung closed behind me, something unclenched in my chest. They'd pushed me out, but they hadn't destroyed me. I had Elaine's letter in my bag. I had my birth mother's inheritance in the bank. For the first time in my life, I had options that had nothing to do with whether the Harringtons considered me worth it. I promised myself right there at the red light at the bottom of the hill, I will not spend the rest of my life grieving people who never really chose me. The apartment I found near campus was small, a little drafty, and painted a shade of beige that seemed personally offended by the concept of joy. But it was mine. The first night, I slept on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the hum of the refrigerator. The silence was loud after years of living in a house where there was always someone shouting into a phone or clinking glasses over a catered dinner. For a few weeks, the novelty of choosing everything for myself, what to eat, when to sleep, whether or not to answer a text, felt intoxicating. Then the loneliness settled in. I'd built my entire identity around performance, grades, awards, perfect daughterhood, perfect victimhood. Without the Harrington house as a reference point, I didn't know who I was. I tried to stay on track with my law school applications, but every time I opened an essay prompt about motivations for studying law or personal experiences with justice, my chest tightened. How could I write about family law and child advocacy while the family that had shaped me pretended I didn't exist? I had no friends I could call at midnight to talk about it. The people I'd studied with in college had moved on, scattered across internships and grad programs in shiny new cities. I'd always been too busy going home to take care of Elaine to build deep friendships. Now Elaine was gone, and I had no idea how to build anything that wasn't a performance. The first time I ran into Madeline after the eviction was at a grocery store. I was studying a wall of canned soup, trying to decide which brand was cheapest without tasting like regret, when I heard her laugh behind me. "Oh my God, Amara!" She stood there in designer athleisure and a perfect blowout, a friend in equally expensive yoga pants at her side. "You look good," she said, loud enough for the people in the aisle to hear. "We never see you anymore." "I've been busy," I said, straightening my spine. "Work. Applications." "Oh, right, the legal thing," she said vaguely. Then to her friend, "Amara used to live with us. Our parents took her in when we were kids. She's been so independent since graduation. We're just so proud of how she's doing on her own now." Her tone made it sound like I was a stray cat they'd nursed back to health and then released into the wild. "We're having a small family gathering next weekend," Madeline added briskly. "Olivia's hosting donors for the foundation. Nothing big, just very inner circle. I'm sure you understand why it might be awkward to invite you." My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed even. "Of course. Tell Olivia I hope the event goes well." "I'll tell her you said hi," she replied, already turning away. "Take care of yourself, okay? Elaine would want that." That night, sitting in my half-furnished apartment, I realized that distance wasn't going to protect me. As long as I lived in the same city, the Harringtons would run into me in grocery stores and coffee shops. They'd recast our history in a way that made them look benevolent and me look lucky, and I would bleed a little more every time. 2 months later, I moved to a different city. Portland felt far enough away that the Harrington last name meant nothing and close enough that I could drive back if I ever needed to. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, updated my resume to say simply, "Family circumstances required relocation." I told myself I was starting over. Really, I was hiding. The legal aid clinic where I eventually found work sat in a converted brick warehouse that smelled like old coffee and new beginnings. We handled everything: custody disputes, eviction defenses, domestic violence restraining orders. But the department that pulled me in like gravity was the family law and adoption unit. Helping other kids navigate the system that had shaped me felt like the only thing that made sense. My supervisor, Janet Ruiz, was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, sharper cheekbones, and a sense of humor so dry it took me 2 weeks to realize she was joking most of the time. "You get it," she told me one evening after I'd helped a grandmother fill out guardianship forms for the third time. "Not just the law, the way this feels for people." I shrugged. "I've seen some things." "That's the polite version," she said. "One day when you're ready, you'll tell me the real version. Until then, keep doing what you're doing. You're good at this." Her praise landed differently than Elaine's had, less like a balm, more like a challenge to keep going. Janet brought me into more complex cases. We met with teenagers who'd been bounced between homes so often they stopped unpacking their bags. We sat with adoptive parents who genuinely wanted to help, but didn't know how to handle trauma that didn't look like movie trauma. For the first time since Elaine died, I felt useful in a way that wasn't about performing for approval. I still went home to my studio apartment and watched TV alone. I still avoided talking about my own adoption, but a seed had been planted. Maybe my story could be more than just something that hurt. 6 months into the job, Janet started forgetting things. First it was small, misplacing a file, calling a client by the wrong name. Then it was bigger, showing up late to court, losing her train of thought mid-sentence. She blamed stress. The MRI blamed a tumor. They're going to operate, she told me one afternoon, dropping a thick folder on my desk. But I'll be out for a while. I need you to cover something for me. I opened the folder. On top was an embossed invitation. The Harrington Family Foundation Annual Gala for Children and Families. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Janet, I can't. It's our biggest donor event of the year, she said, misreading my expression. The foundation's check funds nearly half our adoption advocacy work. I usually go myself, give a little speech, make nice with donors. This year, you'll go in my place. I swallowed. Do we have to? I mean, couldn't someone from admin, Amara? Her voice softened in a way it rarely did. You are the strongest advocate we have. You speak this work from the inside. These people need to see who they're actually funding. I thought about telling her. I thought about saying, the Harrington Family Foundation is my adoptive family's PR machine. They threw me out with a week's notice, and now they fund adoption programs for the tax write-offs and the photo ops. Instead, I forced a smile. Right, I said. Of course, I'll handle it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open and my laptop in front of me and did something I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I Googled the Harrington Foundation. Their website was sleek and tasteful, full of stock photos of smiling children and diverse families. There were press clippings about grants and awards. There were impact reports with numbers and charts. There was a mission statement to support vulnerable children and strengthen family bonds in our community. I scrolled through the Our Story section. It talked about Charles and Elaine's lifelong commitment to children, about how raising 2 daughters had inspired them to help other families. It mentioned a vague experience with fostering that opened their eyes to the system's challenges. My name was nowhere. As far as the public record was concerned, the Harringtons had never adopted anyone. They had never thrown a girl out after 15 years. They had never left a child in legal limbo on purpose. They had simply seen the gaps and stepped up. The more I scrolled, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the lies by omission. It was the fact that they were using Elaine's language, the same words she'd whispered to me about chosen family and commitment, to burnish their own image. Photos from previous galas showed Olivia on stage in glittering gowns, accepting awards for outstanding contribution to child welfare. Madeline stood beside her in most shots, clipboard in hand, the efficient operations director. Charles, in tuxedo and practiced smile, held oversized checks and shook hands with politicians. There was even a photo of the estate that used to be my home, renovated to include a glass-walled ballroom and a private airstrip to accommodate high-profile donors. Every brick of my childhood had been repurposed into a set for their philanthropic theater. I stared at the glowing images on my laptop until my eyes burned. Then slowly, a new emotion rose up beneath the anger. Not grief, not fear, something closer to resolve. For 2 years, I'd been hiding like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I'd been ashamed that I hadn't been good enough to keep. Ashamed that my adoption had been paperwork without commitment. Ashamed that I still thought of them as family when they'd made it clear I was disposable. But Elaine's letter had changed the narrative. I wasn't a burden they'd kindly carried. I was a promise they'd broken. I wasn't going to that gala as a supplicant. I was going as someone who knew exactly who they were and exactly what they'd done. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning to survive the night with my dignity intact, collect the clinic's check, and walk away forever. What I didn't know, staring at photos of my former home and the foundation that had erased me, was that someone else was planning something far more explosive. Hundreds of miles away in a skyscraper with his last name on the top, Ethan Park sat in his office watching the same gala announcement on his tablet. He'd been invited as a keynote donor and strategic partner. He had accepted, not because he cared about the Harrington Foundation, but because 3 months earlier, one of his investigators had slid a file onto his desk with my name on it and said, "We think she'll be there." The night of the gala, the Harrington estate looked like a movie set. Every window glowed with warm light. Valets in crisp jackets jogged between luxury cars in the circular drive. The new glass ballroom jutted out from the back of the house like a crystal ship. For a second, sitting in Elaine's old sedan at the edge of the property, I just watched. It was strange seeing the house from this angle, not as a place I slipped into through the family entrance, but as an outsider arriving for an event. I parked between a white Tesla and a black Mercedes that probably cost more than Elaine's car had when it was new. My hands were damp on the steering wheel. "You're not that 7-year-old girl anymore," I murmured to myself. "You don't need them." Inside the service entrance, the air smelled like garlic, hairspray, and stress. Caterers in black shirts and aprons wove around each other carrying trays. Floral arrangements taller than I was lined the corridor, waiting to be moved into place. A harried woman with a clipboard looked me up and down as I stepped inside. "You're late," she snapped. "Name?" "Amara," I said, "from the Lakeside Legal Aid Clinic. I'm here to accept—" "Oh, thank God," she said, thrusting a bundle of black and white fabric at me. "Two of our servers called in sick, and Olivia's already breathing down my neck. Uniforms are in the staff room. You're on champagne and canapes for cocktail hour." I stared at the uniform. "There's been a mistake. I'm not—" "You're from the clinic, right?" she interrupted. "Olivia said your organization prides itself on hands-on community service and that you were happy to help wherever needed." Of course she did. "Look," the woman continued, already turning away to bark instructions at a bartender. "You can give your little speech later. Right now, I need you carrying a tray, not carrying on." I could have insisted. I could have said I'd leave unless someone from the foundation clarified my role. But Janet's face flashed in my mind, pale and tired in the hospital bed, her voice steady as she said, "This check funds half our adoption work." Real kids stood on the other side of this money. Kids who had no idea the people hosting this event had once told a girl like them she was a burden. I swallowed my pride. "Where do I change?" I asked. 20 minutes later, I walked into the ballroom in a black server's dress and white apron, balancing a tray of champagne flutes like a shield. No one looked at my face. Wealthy people have a way of looking through you when you're holding a tray. It's a skill they cultivate early, I think. You become landscape, part of the decor, moving furniture with a pulse. The ballroom glittered. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, a stage at the far end with a branded Harrington Foundation backdrop. Silent auction tables lined one wall, draped in displays, vacation packages, jewelry, frame photos of children your generosity helps. On the right, a silent video loop played footage of smiling kids at summer camps, tutoring sessions, group homes with fresh paint. In the middle of the room, Charles stood in a dark tuxedo, shaking hands with a city council member like he'd never done anything in his life but welcome people and sign checks. "We believe every child deserves stability and love," he was saying. "Elaine and I were blessed to provide that for our own daughters. Now we're just trying to give back." Our own daughters, not our 3 daughters, not our 2 biological daughters and our adopted daughter. Just the ones who matched. Near the stage, Madeline moved with a headset and a tablet, directing volunteers with the efficiency of a stage manager. "Table 7 needs more place cards. Someone check the gluten-free plates. The governor's aide just texted. They're 10 minutes out." She looked completely in her element. And there, on the small platform at the front of the room, was Olivia. She wore a navy dress that shimmered when she moved and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hanarni, because this foundation exists thanks to my mother," she was saying into the microphone, "who believed that love isn't about blood, but about commitment. She taught us that when you bring a child into your home, you fight for them, always." A soundless laugh rose in my chest. If only these donors knew how flexible that always had been when it came to me. I was trying to slip past the edge of the crowd with my tray when Olivia's gaze slid across the room and locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, her expression cracked. Shock, panic, then calculation. A moment later, the smile was back. "Actually," she said, her voice brightening, "we have someone here tonight who represents exactly what the Harrington Foundation is all about." My stomach dropped. "Amara," she called, sweet and clear across the ballroom, "would you mind coming up here for a moment?" 200 heads turned in unison. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could have pretended not to hear her. I could have ducked back through the service door, but I felt that old familiar pull, the one trained into me at 7 years old. Don't embarrass the family. I set the tray down on a nearby table with hands that weren't quite steady and walked toward the stage. The room parted around me, a sea of expensive perfume and murmurings. Olivia reached down, took my hand, and helped me onto the platform like she was doing me a favor. "Everyone, this is Amara," she said, one arm slung around my shoulders. To the audience, it probably looked affectionate. To me, it felt like a handcuff. She works with one of our partner organizations and has such an inspiring story. My cheeks burned. She grew up in challenging circumstances, Olivia continued smoothly, and thanks to loving guidance and support, she's now helping other kids navigate the system. No mention of where I grew up, no mention of the bedroom down the hall where I used to fall asleep listening to Elaine Reid. To this crowd, I was a product of their generosity, not their sin. "Would you like to say a few words?" Olivia asked, shoving the microphone toward me. For a heartbeat, I considered taking it and telling the truth right there. "Hi, I'm Amara. These people took me in, kept my adoption legally incomplete so they could throw me out if it got inconvenient, and then did exactly that 3 days after my mother died." My throat closed. I couldn't do it. Not yet. "Amara's a little shy," Olivia said, rescuing the moment before it could get messy. "We'll let her get back to her important work tonight, but I hope you'll remember her face when you give. She is exactly the kind of story your generosity creates." She steered me off stage and into a side corridor so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. The moment we were out of sight of the donors, her grip turned to iron. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed. "Working," I said. "For the legal aid clinic, the one your foundation invited." "I know why you're here," she said, eyes glittering. "The question is, what you think you're going to accomplish? You planning to cry on donors' shoes? Tell some sob story about being thrown out?" "I'm here to accept a check and leave," I said. "That's it." She snorted. "No, you're here to do whatever we say you're here to do. Tonight that means carrying trays and smiling for the cameras when appropriate. Don't get confused." She leaned in closer. "You are nothing to us, Amara. You always were. You were a phase of my mother's generosity. You were never Harrington material. Accept your role and don't embarrass yourself." The old shame rose in my chest like smoke. But before I could respond, a murmur rippled through the ballroom. The energy shifted. Conversations tapered off. Heads turned toward the main entrance. Then I heard it. The subtle but unmistakable directive voice of a Secret Service agent. "Clear this corridor. Keep the pathway open." Olivia's hand dropped from my arm. "What now?" she muttered, smoothing her dress and hurrying back into the ballroom. I followed at a distance, heart pounding for reasons entirely separate from the approaching motorcade. At the top of the marble stairs, under the massive arched doorway, men in dark suits and earpieces moved into position. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles said into the microphone, his voice shaky with the strain of something he hadn't planned for. "We have the unexpected honor of welcoming a very special guest tonight." The President of the United States stepped into the ballroom. The room went electric. Applause erupted. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. He descended the stairs with the easy command of someone who'd walked into 100 rooms like this. And at his side, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was a man I hadn't seen in 3 years. Ethan, my Ethan. And yet, not. The Ethan I remembered from college wore hoodies and sneakers and carried around a dented water bottle covered in stickers about climate justice and open source code. This Ethan looked like he lived in boardrooms and summit photos. His hair was shorter, his jawline sharper, his posture more grounded. But his eyes, warm, dark, focused, were exactly the same. He scanned the crowd as he walked in. When his gaze found mine, it was like being hit with a current. He stopped mid-step. For the briefest moment, the room melted away. Donors, chandeliers, the president himself, all of it fading behind the shock and something else in his expression. Relief. "There you are." I hadn't realized how loudly my heart was beating until that moment. I didn't know he'd spent 3 years looking for me. I didn't know he'd traced my disappearance through scraps of information and finally found my name in a donor report from the legal aid clinic. I didn't know that he'd engineered this entire visit, this photo op with the president, around one question. Will she be there? All I knew was that the boy I'd loved in quiet library carols and late-night campus walks was now walking into my former home with the most powerful man in the country, his eyes fixed on me like I was the only person in the room. "Mr. President," Charles stammered into the mic, "we're honored by your presence." "Thank you, Charles," the president said smoothly, taking the microphone. "But the real reason we're here tonight is this man." He gestured to Ethan. "Ethan Park, CEO of Park Dynamics and the architect of our new public-private initiative on tech transparency and philanthropy." The crowd applauded again. Ethan took the microphone, his gaze never fully leaving me. "Thank you," he said, voice steadier than mine had ever been. "We're here tonight because transparency matters. Where your money goes matters. Who you trust to steward your generosity matters." Olivia stood rigidly at the edge of the stage, smile frozen in place. This wasn't in the program. "But we're also here," Ethan continued, "because sometimes the most important partnerships aren't between governments and corporations. Sometimes they're between two people who choose each other when it would be easier to walk away." A murmur rippled through the room. My pulse hammered. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Not here. Not like this. "I came tonight with someone specific in mind," Ethan said, eyes locked on mine now. "Someone who taught me that worth isn't measured by the family you're born into or the name on your mailbox. It's measured by your courage and your kindness." He lifted the microphone slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my future wife." For a heartbeat, the room went completely still. Then every face, the donors, the politicians, the president, the Harringtons, swiveled toward me. The girl in the server's uniform. The tray in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Ethan stepped down from the stage and started walking toward me, the president following with an unreadable expression. My vision tunneled. I thought about every humiliation in that house. Every time I'd twisted myself into knots to be acceptable. Every time I'd fantasized about someone showing up and choosing me, loudly, publicly, undeniably. And now it was happening. Too big, too bright, too much. He reached out his free hand toward me. "Hi, Amara," he said softly. I dropped the tray, glasses shattered against the marble. "I can't," I whispered. Then louder, as he took another step. "I can't do this." And in front of the president, my former family, and 200 of the most powerful people in the city, I turned and ran. The night air hit me like a slap. I pushed through the service door, past startled caterers and security, my heart beating so hard it hurt. I didn't stop until I reached Elaine's old sedan. By then, the panic had fully taken over. My chest felt tight. My hands tingled. The world narrowed to a tunnel of light and sound. I pressed my palms flat against the cool metal of the car and tried to breathe. In, out, in, out. Every voice in my head screamed at once. "You made a scene. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed yourself. You proved them right." "Amara." His voice was softer than I remembered. I turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, tie slightly loosened, hands raised like someone approaching a scared animal. "Please don't run away from me again," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." I managed, my voice raw. "You're supposed to be inside with—" I jerked my head toward the house. "With them. With him." I nodded toward where the president's motorcade was parked. "I told the president I needed 5 minutes," Ethan said. He said, "Go." Uddy, the absurdity of that made something like a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. "This is insane," I said. "You can't just announce me like that, like I'm a prize you won at a charity auction." His face tightened. "That's not what I was doing." "You don't even know me anymore," I said. "You know the girl I used to be, the one who hadn't been thrown out yet, the one who still thought she could earn a family." "I know you," he said simply. "You're the woman who walked into a room full of people who tried to erase her and still held her head up. You're the woman who spent the last 2 years helping kids through a system that nearly broke her." "You hired someone to follow me?" I snapped. "Investigators," he corrected. "Plural. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to tell you I didn't show up here on a whim," he said. "I've been trying to find you for 3 years, Amara." "Why?" The word came out sharp. "Why would you do that? I made it very clear I didn't want to talk to you." He took a step closer. Because the girl I loved would never send me a breakup text full of cliches, he said. Because the timing didn't add up. Because 2 days before you sent that message, your sister was in my dorm room telling me you were falling apart. My breath caught. Olivia, he nodded. She told me you were having panic attacks, he said. That you'd become obsessed with the idea of me being the only way out of your situation. She showed me photos of you from high school when you were sick. Too thin, eyes hollow. She said, this is what happens when she gets fixated on someone. She can't handle it. I remembered those photos. I remembered the year I'd stopped eating properly because it was the only thing I could control. I remembered the way Olivia had confiscated them from my room, out of concern, then apparently saved them for later use. She told me you'd asked her to talk to me, Ethan continued, jaw clenched, that you didn't know how to end things and were afraid of hurting me. She said the kindest thing I could do for you was to give you space. So you believed her, I said dully. I was 20, he said, voice rough. I'd never had someone cry in my dorm room and tell me the person I loved might hurt herself. I believed I'd rather lose you than be the reason you broke, he exhaled. Then your text came. 2 sentences about needing to focus on school and being from different worlds. It read like a script. I told myself it was confirmation, but it never felt right. So why now, I asked. Why come back into my life this way, with the president in that house, in front of them? Because I found out what they did to you, he said simply. I know about the will reading. I know about the unfinished adoption lie. I know they threw you out 3 days after Elaine's funeral. I know about your birth mother's inheritance. Anger flared. You had no right. I had every right, he said, cutting me off. You disappeared because of their manipulation and my weakness. I promised myself that if I ever found you again, I'd show up differently. This isn't different, I said. This is bigger, louder, more humiliating. His face twisted. Humiliating? You called me your future wife in front of the president, I said, in front of the people who made me feel like a burden my entire life, while I was wearing a server's uniform and picking up their dirty glasses. How is that not humiliation? It was meant to be protection, he said. If they know who you are to me, they can't treat you like you're disposable. They already did, I said. And I survived, without you. We stared at each other across the few feet of gravel and night air. I don't want to be rescued, I said finally. I'm not a damsel. I'm tired, Ethan. I'm tired of every story about me involving someone else deciding whether I get to stay or go. Harringtons, foster parents, donors, even you. I need to stand on my own feet. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Then stand. I'm not here to pick you up. I'm here to stand next to you while you do whatever you need to do. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind him. We both turned. Olivia, Madeline, and Charles were approaching, faces tight. Behind them, 2 foundation board members hovered like anxious satellites. There you are, Charles said briskly to Ethan, ignoring me. Mr. President is waiting. We should get you back inside so we can salvage what's left of this evening. Salvage? Ethan repeated, his voice turning to ice. Interesting choice of word. Olivia cut in, eyes on me. Amara, this is not the time for your episodes. You've already caused enough. Enough what? I asked. Enough truth? Enough disruption, Madeline snapped. This is an important night. You don't understand how much is at stake. I think she understands better than anyone, Ethan said, stepping slightly in front of me. We are trying to save children, Charles said, shifting to his benevolent tone. This foundation does real work. If there were imperfections in our family life, that's private. You mean the part where you kept her adoption legally incomplete so you could throw her out without consequences? Ethan asked. The board members shifted uncomfortably. That's a very serious accusation, Charles said. You should be careful what you repeat. Oh, I've seen the paperwork, Ethan said calmly. And I've heard your own words. Did you forget the hallway security cameras in your own house? They pick up audio surprisingly well. Olivia's face drained of color. You secretly recorded. I didn't, Ethan said. Your own security system did. All I did was subpoena the footage when one of your staffers reached out to us with concerns about your Adoption story. I blinked. Someone on the inside had talked? Look, Madeline said, panic creeping into her voice. This is all being taken out of context. We did what we could for her. There were legal complications. We were under no obligation. Exactly, I said quietly. They all looked at me. You loved having the option, I continued. That's what this was always about. Keeping me in a gray zone so you could claim me when it looked good and erase me when it didn't. You have no idea what it took to integrate you into this family, Olivia said, desperation making her careless. The stares, the questions, the way people looked at us. We did you a favor. A favor, I repeated. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't panic anymore. It was something else. Clarity. For years I thought I owed you everything, I said. A bed, clothes, food, a last name. I twisted myself into knots trying to be worthy of the favor you did me. I straightened. But you know what I realized? I was never a favor. I was a promise. One you made to a dying woman and broke the moment it became inconvenient. Silence fell over the little group. In the distance, we could hear the muffled hum of the gala continuing. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. You think anyone in there will believe your version? Charles asked finally, brittle superiority snapping back into place. We have decades of reputation, photos, stories, records. You have hurt feelings. I smiled. Funny you should mention records. I held up my phone. The recording app's red bar glowed cheerfully. I started this the second Olivia grabbed my arm on stage, I said. Every cruel word, every slip, every half confession. You've been very helpful. Charles's jaw clenched. You wouldn't. I would, I said. Not to hurt you. To protect every kid whose future depends on donors knowing who they're really funding. Beside me, Ethan exhaled slowly, something like pride in his eyes. You want a war? Olivia demanded, voice shaking. You think you can take down this family? We have lawyers you can't imagine. Connections. Media. Same, Ethan said mildly, with a slightly larger budget. But this isn't his battle, I said, glancing at him. Not really, it's mine. I took a breath that felt like it reached all the way to the soles of my feet. I'm not going to scream on the sidewalk or egg your cars, I said. I'm going to do what I was trained to do. I'm going to tell the truth, clearly, calmly, to the people who need to hear it most. And who might that be? Charles sneered. I looked past him at the glow of the ballroom. Your donors, I said. The politicians, the president, everyone inside who thinks their generosity is helping kids, when really it's helping you hide what you did to one. Olivia laughed, but it was high and thin. You'll never get the microphone. We control the program. Tonight you don't, Ethan said. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text. A moment later, a Secret Service agent appeared at the edge of the driveway. Mr. Park, he said, the president would like to know if your additional remarks are still happening. Olivia's head snapped toward him. Additional what? Ethan smiled faintly. I told him I might need a few minutes to demonstrate exactly why transparent philanthropy matters, he said. He was very interested. Real fear flickered across Charles's face. Amara, Ethan said softly, turning back to me. You don't owe anyone in there anything. You can get in your car and drive away. I'll still push for investigations. I'll still make sure this foundation is audited into dust. You never have to see them again. For a moment, the thought was tempting. Leaving, never having to stand under those chandeliers again. But then I saw in my mind's eye the kids on the Harrington website, the ones whose faces would be used to sanitize this story long after I was gone. I'm done running, I said. I slid my phone into my pocket. I'm going back inside. If you've ever wondered what power feels like when you've never had it before, let me tell you. It doesn't feel like a cape or a crown or a spotlight. It feels like walking into the same room where you used to shrink and realizing you don't have to anymore. The ballroom buzzed with nervous energy when we returned. People had clearly noticed my dramatic exit and Ethan's absence. Conversation stopped entirely when the president stepped aside and gestured for Ethan to take the microphone again. Thank you, Ethan said. I know tonight has already had some unplanned excitement. I asked for just a few more minutes of your time because I realized there was a story being told in this room that wasn't quite complete. His eyes found mine across the room and held. The Harrington Foundation invited the president and me here tonight as part of a new initiative on transparency and philanthropy, he continued. So in the spirit of transparency, I'd like to introduce you to someone whose story you deserve to hear. He extended a hand toward me. This time I walked toward him. My server's uniform was still on. My hair was frizzing at the edges. My makeup was probably streaked. I didn't care. This is Amara, Ethan said into the microphone, his voice steady. She grew up in this house. The murmurs started immediately. The donors looked from me to Charles to the family photos on the wall and back again. She was adopted into the Harrington family when she was 7, Ethan continued. For 15 years, she lived in the home where you're now sipping champagne and writing checks. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. If you're wondering why you've never heard her name in their speeches about 2 daughters, he said, she's going to tell you. He handed me the microphone. My hands were trembling, but when I spoke, my voice didn't shake. Hi, I said. My name is Amara. I'm a family law advocate at Lakeside Legal Aid, and for a long time I thought I was the lucky one. I told them about 7-year-old me, clutching a stuffed bear and stepping into the Harrington foyer. I told them about Elaine's warmth, about late-night bedtime stories, about science fair ribbons next to soccer trophies. I told them about Charles's cold eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, about whispered comments in hallways, about the way waiters always assumed I wasn't with the family. I told them about the will reading, about getting a box of letters while everything else was divided between their daughters, about being told I had a week to leave, about the meeting in the study where Charles slid across papers and said my adoption had never really been finalized. The crowd was utterly still. No one here knew about me, I said, because the Harringtons liked having options. It's easier to present a clean narrative when you can erase the uncomfortable parts. I pulled my phone from my pocket. 15 minutes ago, in the driveway outside, they reminded me exactly how they see me, I said. I thought you might want to hear that too. I hit play. Their voices rang out over the speakers. You were a foster placement, not really family. We did you a favor. You're nothing to us. We couldn't be expected to carry a burden that isn't legally ours. Each sentence landed like a stone in water. By the time the recording ended, the room was vibrating with anger, but not at me. The president took a step forward. Mr. Harrington, he said, his tone cool and controlled, I think we need to have a conversation about your foundation's eligibility for federal partnerships and tax exemptions. Reporters, because of course there were reporters, were already lifting their cameras. A donor near the front stood up. I want my check back, he said, and I want to see audited statements for the last 10 years. Others chimed in. We'll be reviewing our support. This is outrageous. How many other Amars have you done this to? Charles tried to speak. His usual charm and authority fell flat. There are complexities you don't understand. What we understand, the president said, is that your own words show a pattern of emotional abuse and manipulation toward a child you positioned as a prop in your philanthropic narrative. He looked at me. Ms. Amara, he said, if you're willing, I'd like to connect you with our team investigating nonprofit accountability. Your perspective would be valuable. My throat tightened. I'd be honored, I said. For once, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months later, I sat in front of a congressional subcommittee, a nameplate in front of me that read, Amara J. Park Director, Park Lakeside Institute for Adoption Justice. Yes, I'd taken Ethan's last name, not because it elevated me, but because we'd decided to build something together that needed both our names on the door. The Harrington Foundation no longer existed. Federal investigations had found financial irregularities, misrepresented programs, and deliberate obfuscation of adoption success rates. Charles faced criminal charges. Olivia and Madeline dealt with civil suits and the loss of every board seat they'd leveraged the foundation into. None of that was the point of my testimony. I wasn't there as their victim. I was there as a specialist. We proposed reforms, mandatory independent audits for adoption charities, clear oversight mechanisms, protections for children placed in homes run by philanthropists who might see them as brand assets instead of human beings. When the hearing ended, reporters shouted questions. How does it feel to bring down the family that raised you? One asked. I thought about it. It doesn't feel like bringing them down, I said. It feels like protecting the kids they pretended to care about. Outside on the Capitol steps, Ethan was waiting. How'd it go, Dr. Park? He asked, grinning. I rolled my eyes. I'm not a doctor. You have 2 degrees and a national commission appointment, he said. Close enough. We walked away from the cameras together toward a car that didn't feel like an escape vehicle anymore. It felt like transportation, to somewhere chosen, to a home we'd picked. Yes, we had one of those now. Not a mansion on a hill, but a big, slightly crooked house on a tree-lined street, with a front porch and a swing, and enough rooms for the kids we planned to welcome one day. Kids we'd choose, kids we'd fight for, kids who would never, ever be kept in legal limbo for convenience. A year later, as I packed lunches in a sunlit kitchen, a small voice piped up behind me. Amara? I turned. Kayla, 8, stood in the doorway, curls sticking up in every direction, clutching the stuffed fox we'd given her on adoption day. Yes, Bug. Can you sign my field trip form? She asked. They said it has to be a parent. The word hit me like sunlight, not shock. Yeah, I said, taking the clipboard with a smile. I can do that. As I signed, she studied me. Were you scared? She asked suddenly. When? I asked. When you told those people what they did to you, she said. On TV. Ethan showed me clips. He said we don't have to watch if it makes us sad, but I wanted to see. You looked not scared, but like you were doing something big. I thought about chandeliers and microphones and the sound of my own voice filling a room that used to swallow it. I was terrified, I admitted, but I was more tired of being quiet than I was scared of speaking. Kayla considered that. Is that why you tell judges when they're being unfair? She asked. Because you're tired of being quiet? Exactly, as I said. She nodded, satisfied. Okay, she said. Good, because I want to do that too when I'm big. But for animals and maybe kids if I have extra time. I laughed. Sounds like a plan, I said. She ran off to find her shoes. I leaned on the counter for a moment, letting gratitude and grief and quiet joy wash over me in waves. If you're still here, watching, listening, wherever you are, I want you to hear this part clearly. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it, not by the parent who walked away, not by the partner who believed lies about you, not by the family that made you feel like a burden. The Harringtons didn't define me. They revealed me by forcing me to decide who I wanted to become when their version of me no longer applied. I chose to become someone who tells the truth, someone who fights for kids who can't yet fight for themselves, someone who walks away from people who only know how to love with conditions and walks toward people who choose her without contracts or caveats, someone who can look a little girl in the eye and sign a form as her parent without feeling like an imposter. If this story has followed you into bed tonight, or onto a bus, or into a quiet corner of your lunch break, I want to talk just to you for a moment. If you've ever been the extra one in the photo, if you've ever felt like your place in a family, a relationship, a job, a friendship depended on flawless performance, if you've ever believed someone who told you you were too much, too needy, too broken, too complicated to keep, breathe. You are not a burden. You are not a favor someone did once and then regretted. You are not a project. You are not disposable. You might be bruised. You might be rebuilding. You might be standing outside a metaphorical mansion with your whole life in 3 suitcases, wondering if there's anything on the other side of this. There is. You might not see it yet. You might not believe it yet. That's okay. Keep going anyway. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button so the algorithm actually shows it to people who need it. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who refuse to stay where they were put and instead choose where they belong. And tell me in the comments if you feel safe doing so. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a feeling, something you're still looking for? I read as many of your comments as I can, and I promise you this. Even if no one in your current life has ever said it out loud, your story matters. Your search for belonging matters. And one day you'll look back at the places that threw you out and realize they were never big enough to hold who you were becoming. Take care of yourself tonight. You belong more than you know.